Yeah, I think I'm metabolically optimistic. And so even when I've been depressed or I'm writing about bad things, I try to see what's comical about it. For example, the, our president is named Donald Bush, Donald Trump. Uh, so I've done a lot of writing about, I've been in a couple of wars, and I've, I've done things that were a little bit dangerous sometimes, but I enjoy it. Even when I was depressed about my divorce from my second wife, I could say, in a sense, when I couldn't sleep, I would enjoy my depression and enjoy my insomnia. I would go out and walk around North Beach or walk on Polk Street, and I always found things that were interesting, and there's always a kind of humor in something that's interesting. At least that's the way I've seen it. For example, there was an all-night restaurant at the Fairmont Hotel, and I would go and have breakfast there. I don't know if you read this. I described this in one of my books. And there were pimps who'd taken their hookers for R&R, and in one case, and so the people eating at 3:30 or 4 in the morning were either tourists who'd come to the Fairmont, were staying at the Fairmont, and they were jet lagged. There was a German table with 3 or 4 men smoking cigars, and genuine, authentic San Francisco hookers with their genuine, authentic San Francisco pimps. And there was a woman who threw a plate at her protector, and obviously there was pain going on in this place. The Germans were insomniac and they were jet lagged. The pimp was earning his living at his trade, and the girls were whatever they were. It's not a life that's enviable, but and there I was, a recently divorced man, unable to sleep because he was depressed about a wife he cared about, who was gone. That's just the way I see the world. Well, as Nabokov said, if I were to name the most interesting person I could think of in San Francisco, the thousands or maybe millions of other people who pass through San Francisco would be insulted because they weren't that person. It's very hard. You know, I've met various people interesting in different ways. Beautiful women who were interesting for being beautiful, very smart people who were interesting for being brilliant, talented people, kind people. It's a little like asking someone who has 5 children, what's your favorite child? You know, in different contexts. Obviously, if you're horny and out in the world and you like women, the most interesting person is the beautiful woman who's nice to you. When my graduate work was in philosophy, when I'm talking philosophy with my friend John Searle, who's a professor at UC Berkeley, he's very interesting. I mean, intensely interesting. Actually, he's one of the funniest people I know, and that I would forgive him a lot of faults because of that. For example, some years ago, he knew that my graduate work was in philosophy. He knows that. So he told me that some famous English philosopher was coming for a year in Berkeley. And I said, John, I'm not keeping up with that, with philosophy now. I don't know his work. He said, what? He's the smartest man in England. And then he said, and when he gets to San Francisco, he'll be the second smartest man in San Francisco. And I'll always remember John for that. I love Soroyan's work, which I had read as a child, and and I reviewed one of his later books. His reputation has not been as high as it should be. He wrote too much, but his best work was great, and near the end of his life, he wrote an immensely moving book about aging, called Obituaries. I didn't meet him in San Francisco. I met him first. I think, in Paris, actually, and I saw him in various other places. But when he was living in the Bay, he was in the Bay Area quite a lot. He had a house in San Francisco, but he lived most of his time, most of the time here in Fresno. But I would go down to Fresno to see him. So I loved his work, and there were other good writers. Kevin Starr, who died recently, was a wonderful critic and wrote brilliantly about San Francisco. There are many. Cyril McFadden is a writer who's written two terrific books. One called The Serial, which is very, very funny and satirical about the peculiarities of Mill Valley, and the other called Rain or Shine, which is about her father, which is very moving. Unfortunately, she's only written those two books, although she did some other newspaper writing. There have been a number of very good writers, very good poets. So it's like the children. At different times, you admire different things. I came here I came here to live in 1960, but I'd been here earlier as a teenage runaway. At age 17, I hitchhiked here from my hometown in the Paris of northeastern Ohio, Cleveland, and I was here then. And then during the war, what I call the war, World War II now, it's called. I was stationed near the end of the war, supposedly on my way to China to help the Soviets who were going to invade China to drive the Japanese out. Anyway, I spent time here then. The Army made me a Russian interpreter, so I spent a lot of time at Fifth and Clement, where there was a little Russian colony, a ballet school, Russian cafes, Russian restaurants. Now it's mainly a Chinese district, but there is a little bit of the Russian still left. And then I came here in 1957. I was doing an article about divorce in Nevada, so I was in Reno. I lived for a while in one of these bide-a-wee homes where almost entirely it was women, because in 1957 their husbands were working and they were coming out here getting divorced. And I came to San Francisco then, and I had a book out, a book called The Man Who Was Not With It then, and so I kind of made friends with some of the bookstore people, and Allen Ginsberg was here. We'd gone to college together, so I hung out a bit with him. It was pretty much the climax of the Beat generation, so-called Beat generation in San Francisco. And then when I came here in 1960, it was to do a play with I'd written a play and had a Ford grant to do a year at a theater. There was a very good theater here called the Actors Workshop. They were going to do it, except I vetoed the choice for the leading lady, so they couldn't do it. When the film was eventually, they couldn't do it because I wouldn't let them. It was the play was actually done as a staged reading for I think it was a week in Los Angeles when Gordon Davidson came out to start the Mark Taper Forum and the Music Center Theater. He had hoped to raise money to do it on Broadway with Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward. And when I finally saw it on stage, I didn't want it to be done because, I mean, when I saw it staged as a reading, I realized that it wasn't a proper play yet. It wasn't what I wanted, really. So, and I never went back to rewrite it. Anyway, the long story, that's a long way of saying there are a lot of interesting people here. There still are a few third-generation beatniks in North Beach. A couple poets and a number of people, actually. Well, there's a lot of loss, and when I say I try to see the humor in events, I do not see the humor in my contemporaries disappearing. And I have only very few of my, I tell people my main social life is going either to funerals or memorials. There are a couple of people I know who are, there's a woman in Belvedere who's actually a couple years older than I am, who's a good friend. She's not a writer, although she did do a little literary journalism years ago. And she's still got all her marbles, which I think I do too. But aging means I see a lot of ghosts, because even in my years living here, which 57 years, a lot of people that I was friendly with are gone. And when I walk in North Beach, I remember various people who are disappeared, and there's a lot of grief connected with that. I had a friend, I'll not name him, also a writer, who lived out of San Francisco, lived at, I think it was Point Reyes, anyway, in the fairly distant suburbs. And we had an off and on friendship, but I liked him. We had met in Paris many years ago. We were pretty close to exact contemporaries. And he came into town once and called me when he was in town, said, let's have lunch. And I was writing. And I said, I can't do that now today, but we could have dinner, but he wanted to get back, I guess. And next time you're in town, give me some warning and I'll make a plan. And what I realized later was that he was coming to say goodbye. And that's not, there's no humor in that. I missed the chance to see him one more time. I remembered that when I was a teenage rebel, I didn't approve of my parents at all in Cleveland. When I got out of high school early, and instead of doing what they wanted me to do, getting a job or starting college early, I decided I wanted to hitchhike around America, which I did. I rebelled. My father was an immigrant, and I rebelled against what he was doing. He would have wanted me to study business or law or medicine, and I wanted to do what I wanted to do. But by my mid-30s, I appreciated him, and I learned that our quarrels were based on his loving me. And so even when I was through bad times with a couple of my kids, I knew it was going to come out I felt it was going to come out all right if they didn't kill me, but they didn't do that. One of my daughters, and I guess I'll name this now, went through a really hard adolescence, partly because of my divorce from her mother, and partly because of competition from other girls. Girls can be really difficult in high school, and she did some things that I didn't like at all, but we kept in contact, and now the relationship is just beautiful, and I think that helps me to be optimistic about the future too. Is that in addition, if you have, and you feel this, you said you have twins also. I don't believe I'm going to go to heaven when I die, but I think I'm going to survive because my children will carry on elements of me. There's a wonderful line in a book by Lincoln Steffens. Lincoln Steffens was born when his father was old, and Lincoln Steffens had a son when he was old, I think in his 60s. And so his son did not know Lincoln Steffens' father, but nevertheless, the line in that book is it's Lincoln Steffens' autobiography, is the influence of my father on my son. He could see, although they never met each other, that traits of his father, even the way he walked, had been passed on through him to his son. So one of my daughters was a lawyer. She was, and I'm argumentative, and one of my daughters is a clinical psychologist, and I'm very interested in her analyses of what people mean, who they are. One of my sons is a yoga teacher. I have no connection with that, except I've attended some of her yoga classes. But she was an actress until she decided to be a yoga teacher. One of my sons is a writer, actor, director of films, and obviously that's something that I have a lot of feeling for and have some experience with, although I never directed film. But I have been a writer for quite a few years. And my other son is a musician, and I sing out of tune. I used to, when they were children, I would sing French songs, Creole songs, or Russian songs to them. I speak French and Russian. Actually, I was taught Russian by the army. My Russian, I'm not going to croak a Russian song to you because my ears have aged and my vocal cords have probably aged. In fact, I know they have. Long life. I've written a fair number of books, but there are many writers who've written more books than I have. Joyce Carol Oates for sure, and my good friend Jerome Sharon, who's a very good writer, has written many books, and Balzac wrote many books, and he died fairly young, probably from too much black coffee giving him cancer of the stomach. But I'm curious about the world, so when I'm not writing a novel, I've done a lot of travel writing and reporting. Maybe writing a relatively a lot is a metabolic flaw also, and I'm not sure that I know some of our writing is better than others, but that's part of the deal. You try to do something, and as with an inventor, sometimes the invention doesn't work out. And I've started books which I didn't finish. My first novel was published when I was quite young, when I was 25, which means I was starting to write it when I was about 23. And it did a lot of good for me professionally because it was published, got some good reviews, published by Viking Press, a good publisher. But I don't think it's a very good book now. I think it maybe was promising, but it's not a book. But it helped me to write the next book. It gave me the freedom to do it. So, and sometimes the lightning strikes, and some of my earlier writing I value. Yeah, I want to reflect the world as it is, but also change it and make magic of the world as it is. And then I want to take the crazy things that happen in the world and make them real for people. So it's a two-way street. I want to turn reality into magic and magic into reality. At least that's what I think I'm doing. That's what I try to do. But somehow, the brain doesn't write the book. The fingers write the book. I sit at the typewriter, or I sit with a pad in a cafe, and I start writing. There was a wonderful poet, not very much read anymore, unfortunately, Delmore Schwartz, who said, if you can't think of anything to say, take a pad of paper and start moving your pen on the paper, and then look down and say, what have you done? What have I done? Writing begets writing. Well, the experience meant that I was exposed to very different people, clearly. I was exposed to officers I didn't like. I was exposed to fellow soldiers, some of whom I bonded with and some of whom I didn't like at all. I got into fights I got into a very serious fight with one of my fellow soldiers, a very big, heavy guy, much bigger than me, who was marching behind me. We were just in basic training. You know, we were actually preparing to go during the Battle of the Bulge. I was removed from the Russian program and put in the 100th Infantry Division. We were going to go to Germany. But as he was marching behind me, I did a thing that's really, really forbidden in the Army, really bad news. He was kicking me from behind, and instead of saying 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, marching in step, he was saying kike, 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 kike. So I dropped my rifle. I had an M1 rifle, and socked the guy, and that just stopped this drill. The officer said I should have you court-martialed, dropping a weapon and breaking ranks for this. He said, but instead, we're going to have a fight, stage a fight. So I'd never had any boxing experience. I used to sometimes play hitting a punching bag, a lightweight punching bag, but that I wasn't a boxer. So that evening he set up in the day room of our company a ring, and everybody in the company was gathered around to watch. And I'd never had heavy boxing gloves on, so he put boxing gloves on me and on boxing gloves on this other guy, and this was on the East Coast at Fort Bragg in North Carolina, so then we started this battle. I was swinging at him as hard as I could. He was swinging at me as hard as he could. It got very hot, and what I didn't know, the captain had put very heavy boxing gloves on, and lifting them and swinging them the way we were doing, it was really, really tiring, exhausting. And suddenly there was an air raid drill. The lights went out, so we fell to the floor. Everybody did. This is what you did during air raid, during this kind of heavy drill. and fall asleep immediately. And after 20 minutes or so, it was just an air raid drill. The lights went back on, the siren went on, announcing the end of the air raid, and neither my adversary nor I could move. We were so stiff. Our arms were so stiff. But this guy never bothered me again, I have to say. So this kind of experience I never really had elsewhere. This kind of anti-Semitic, racist experience from he was Southern. He was from, I think, Georgia. But he didn't bother me after that. And I didn't bother him. I never would have bothered him. A lot of the San Francisco spirit was really congenial to me. I had loved living in Paris, but Paris wasn't my home. It was I felt I really needed to be in America, but San Francisco was both America and had some of the free-spiritedness of bohemian Paris. I asked, and blacks had a hard time for sure, and especially during the war, the Japanese community was treated very badly, and the Chinese who came here early working on the railroad, they were treated badly. There still is prejudice here, but it's leveled out in a way that it hadn't been in America earlier. I asked a friend of mine who taught at UC Berkeley, lived here, I said, why is it there's so little, there's no real, well, there is a kind of ghetto now, Hunters Point and Potrero, and there was a sort of Japanese neighborhood that was decimated, of course, by the isolation of the Japanese during the war, and certainly Chinatown was a center. But basically, the city is, you can live almost any place now, if you can afford it. If you can afford it. And anyway, my friend said that different spirit here is because nobody came first. Basically, the city started with the gold rush, 1848, 9, 50, and so on. So I've lived in San Francisco now for almost a third of the entire life of San Francisco. Before that, there was a little village, but basically San Francisco started with the gold rush. And then when I came out here in the 60s, the beat, freedom, which I was then living among here on the edge of North Beach, was very congenial to me. I had a friend, I hope he's still alive. If he is alive, he's pretty old, but I've lost track of him, named Pierre Delattre, who, last I contacted him, he was living in New Mexico. He was I think a congregational minister, and he came out here. The church formed a mission to the Beats, so he was sent out here as a young minister to convert the Beats to Christianity. Well, what happened was that Pierre Delattre was converted to beatnickery, and he became a poet and a meditator and went to Esalen and so on. The spiritual, I'm proud of being Jewish, and I actually value my tradition as a Jew and my ancestry, but I don't follow the ritual. I was never bar mitzvahed, for example. I sometimes go to temple or Jewish events because one of my daughters particularly is observant. But I don't like to use the word spiritual because that's bragging, but I believe there is a power in the universe and we're part of it, and I value that energy, which you can find in in different religions and in different beliefs. I had an explosion about that after the war. When I was back at Columbia, there was a professor at Barnard across Broadway in New York who, and I read a book of his, and I wanted to take a class from him. And at that time, Barnard was entirely a woman's school. So I got permission to take a class for credit across Broadway at Barnard. And Professor Montague said, there's a power in the universe making for righteousness. So I raised my hand and I said, Professor Montague, I believe in the first part of your proposition. There's a power in the universe, but I don't see anything making for righteousness. There's too much misery and there's too much failure, there's too much death, and there's too much, I mean, death comes to everyone, but there's too much suffering. I think he wanted to flunk me out of the class for that. In fact, he did lower my grade from what he would have given me otherwise because of that. So if you want to call that spiritual, I guess it is. I don't like to use the word exactly. I met him a couple of times. He's from Cleveland, my hometown. I don't know his work very well, but we used to talk on the phone now and then. Is he still alive? I think I signed some of a petition or a declaration. He was angry with the film business, I think. But I haven't been in touch with him in a long time, a very long time. And if I met him, it was very briefly a long time ago.
My son is named after him.
Oh, really?
He was
Harlan
Ellison.
Yeah, he wrote good science fiction, and he wrote some movies that were interesting. If I had named a son, I did not name a son using the word Ellison, it would have been after Ralph Ellison. Well, high quality poetry is, poetry isn't like eggs that are either medium quality or refrigerated or maybe high quality. Allen and I were friends at college. We always disagreed about many, many things. He was openly gay, and we used to sit we used to meet at a restaurant bar on Broadway. The name went out of my head just for a second ago, and argue about that. He kept saying, "How do you know you wouldn't like it if you didn't try it?" He also was at that period in his life very enraptured by Saint Teresa, and he also thought that Jack Kerouac was a genius, a great writer. So I disagreed about a lot of these things. I didn't like, Jack was also at Columbia then, and I didn't like him at all. But I did like Allen. So we quarreled, and I think he even wrote critically about me at times, and I wrote critically about Allen. But basically we were friends, and to the end of his life we were friends. A lot of what is, I've seen the best minds of my generation, etc. That poem, how they weren't the best minds. Carl Solomon, that he wrote about in that poem, was not the best mind of his generation. He was someone who had been in Bellevue along with Allen, and I think a lot of his poetry that I really like is comical. He doesn't. It is comical when you say, "I've seen the best minds of my generation running in the streets." Allen had theories about writing which are far from what I would say. Maybe Garrison Keillor was thinking of the fact that a lot of what Allen wrote was done under speed, or he had also a theory about that. First breath, best breath, he used to say. But then some of it was charming, funny, insightful, feelingful, and Allen had wonderful ability to love people, even people he disagreed with, like me. So I responded to that. I remember once we met, he was helping William Burroughs put together Naked Lunch. In fact, he introduced me to Burroughs. And we sat in a San Francisco style of that period. This was the Beat period, late 50s. Restaurant in Paris called Aubergine, and it was a vegetarian restaurant. And suddenly, Allen, we were talking, he took out his little piano, little thumb piano or whatever it was that he was playing, and he sang a Buddhist country rock song that he'd written in the restaurant. A lot of people didn't know who he was. Few, maybe Americans would have known, but not many of the French people there would have known. And I because of my limited quality as a singer, I can recite the words to this song. Eat when you eat, drink when you drink, fuck when you fuck, die when you die. I thought it was charming and funny, you know, and to call that a Buddhist way of looking at life, in a way, is not untrue. But it's very much Allen. And I used to go when he would be here giving lectures later, much later, and people there was a big hall at USF, University of San Francisco, and people were hanging from the roofs. It seemed everybody was. I mean, he had real crowds, and he had a nice baritone voice, and he was a good reader, and his affection for people was genuine. He toward the end of his father was a not very good poet, but Allen, who had rebelled against his parents, of course, especially his father, not his mother, who was psychotic and was institutionalized, and he gave his father an audience by touring. They did joint readings. It was a very affectionate thing to do. People didn't come to hear Allen, whatever Allen's father's name was. They came to hear Allen Ginsberg. His lover, Peter Orlovsky, I met Allen. He was here for a little while, and he was frantic and had a pale face, and he was. I said, Allen, how are you? I met him on Grant. He was running to a drugstore, and I said, what's the matter? He said, Peter has a headache. I got to buy some aspirin. You know, and there was something comical about it, but also touching. One of the reasons I didn't like Kerouac was that Kerouac pretended to be macho, but he was really bisexual. When we were at Columbia, he was found in bed in the dorm with Allen, but Kerouac would never admit that. Also, Kerouac later had a daughter. I knew his daughter quite well, unfortunately, because she was a sad case. Jan, he never helped her in any way. He finally, because she looked very much like a young female version of Jack. She was very pretty, actually. He said grudgingly to her, "You can use my name if you want," but he never did anything else for her. The way I met her was was there was a celebration, I think it was organized by Jerry Nicosia, who wrote a book about Kerouac. I'm not sure that he did it. Anyway, in honor of Kerouac's birthday, Kerouac was already dead. He died of his alcohol abuse, I think around the age of 48, 47 or 8, and he was bloated. He was no longer pretty. She came up to me and said, you knew my father. And I said, I didn't really know him. This is my first meeting of her. I really didn't know him because I avoided him. I didn't like him and I wasn't taken with him. And she said, and this was a tragic thing for a daughter to say, she said, you knew him better than I did.